Tragedy is a thing that the native people of this land have experienced far too often since the arrival of the people from across the Atlantic Ocean. Endless skirmishes for land, countless manipulations by the politically savvy Europeans, and the horrible trail of tears had left the native people distrustful of white men. They never thought to be betrayed by their own people until it was too late. That betrayal led to one of the greatest tragedies in their history. It occurred during the beginning of the Civil War, a tragedy that never needed to happen. It is now known as the Trail of Blood on Ice. Albert Pike and the Confederate Army, representing the Confederate States, began working to negotiate a series of treaties with the Native Americans of Indian Territory. On July 10, 1861, he successfully negotiated a treaty with the Creek tribe. Enlistment of the new soldiers began immediately. The leader of the Upper Creeks, Opothleyahola, wished to remain neutral in what he considered to be a white man's war. He, along with many other Creeks and Seminoles, decided to leave Indian Territory before the fighting began. He drafted a letter to President Abraham Lincoln asking for assistance, and though he had not expected a response, received one from the President promising him protection and directing him to lead his people to Fort Row, Kansas. On November 5, 1861, with Colonel Douglas H. Cooper closing in on the Creek and Seminole encampment at North Fork, Opothleyahola broke camp and began his journey north. Slowed by the women, children, and elderly in his party, the Creek leader was forced to turn and battle the pursuing Confederates on 3 occasions. Smatty Pigeon, a member of the fleeing party, told in the Indian pioneer papers of how the Confederate soldiers would catch up to them occasionally, snatching children from their mothers' arms and slamming their heads into trees to kill them before murdering their distraught mothers. The first actual battle on the Trail of Blood on Ice was fought at Round Mountain near the mouth of the Cimarron River on November 19, 1861. The exact site of this battle is still hotly debated. There is evidence suggesting that it was near present-day Yale, Oklahoma, while other evidence places it a mile north of Keystone. Regardless of where it was fought, the battle was indecisive with no clear victor. The second major battle was fought near Bird Creek on December 9, 1861. Known as the Battle of Chusto-Talasa, or Caving Banks, it is best known for being the battle where two bands of Cherokee soldiers defected from the Confederate lines and assisted Opothleyahola after being led to believe that the old chief wished to discuss terms. Opothley used his formidable ability as a spokesman to convince them that they were all brothers, after which they deserted Cooper's force. After this battle, in which Colonel Cooper was injured, his men removed themselves to Fort Gibson, where he expected to wait for reinforcements before continuing his pursuit. Instead, the command for the pursuit of Opothleyahola''s fleeing band of civilians was handed over to Colonel James M. McIntosh, who immediately left to intercept Opothleyahola. He finally did so on Christmas Day of 1861. The third and final major battle was fought near Hominy Falls on December 26, 1861, the Battle of Chusto-Talasa. Stephen R. Lewis, who knew the owners of the ranch where the battle occurred, told in the Indian pioneer papers of how Opothleyahola''s scouts, upon seeing the Confederates, shouted, "See the Confederates coming? Now we'll get some good overcoats," demonstrating their already growing desperation. Then the Confederates opened fire on them, killing all but one, and began closing in on Yahola's people. The battle was lost by Opothleyahola, whose remaining people fled in terror to the north, heading straight into a strong blizzard. In their frenzied escape, they had been forced to leave behind their horses and wagons, which carried their supplies, food, and most importantly, clothing. Many of the survivors would never see Fort Row, dying of exposure, exhaustion, or getting shot by the pursuing troops of Stand Watie on the trip north to the Union stronghold. Days later, they finally arrived at Fort Row, an exhausted group of people who had wanted nothing more than to stay out of the war. Opothleyahola and a handful of his people had survived the pursuits of Cooper and McIntosh before facing the ravages of nature to reach their destination. The heroic leader would spend the rest of his days petitioning for supplies for his people because the camps that had been hastily erected for them upon their arrival were poorly stocked and barely livable. In the following summer, the summer of 1862, Opothleyahola, chief of the Upper Creeks, having worked himself tirelessly to the end for his people, reached the clearing at the end of the path. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that his body was buried in an unknown and unmarked grave near the Sac and Fox Agency in Quinamo, Osage County, Kansas, a pitiful end to a heroic leader's life.